Hey everybody, it's Brian Burns and welcome to this episode of the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. Hey, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about this episode. Been doing a lot of work with Gong.io and what they're doing about sales conversations. They're making the distinction of the sales conversation as the real differentiator between the A and the B players. And the research is showing a couple of critical things about listen time, questioning, and me and Chris Orlob are on the B2B Revenue Show this week talking about the research results. So if you like an interview format, make sure you're checking that out. What I want to talk is more anecdotal, my experience, what I have found to be the top three things that differentiate the A and the B player. And I want to boil this down so that you can really go away and think about this and see like how good am I at these things. Now you can think that there are other three things, and these are not the typical what you hear, determination, resilience, hard work. Those are all good things, but that's not what that's how you show up. That's not how you're playing the game. That's how you're reacting to the game. That's how you're preparing for the game. All good, all important. But what really seems to matter is those in-game activities. You know, that yes, you need to practice, and yes, you need to reflect, and yes, you need to be motivated and focused and all that stuff. I'm not downplaying that. But when you're playing the game of sales, the real sales conversation, that's when all that stuff either comes together or doesn't. And I want to talk about what the difference is that I've seen. Now, number one is definitely empathy, the ability to put yourself in the client's place. Now, we are programmed not to do this. Our whole brain is 3/4 focused on our own survival, on us, and it should be. The problem is, as we evolve as human beings, we have to understand that everything that we want is held by somebody else. And we have to convince them that we're going to exchange something for what they have. And to do that, we have to understand the world from their perspective. Now, you would think that this is a skill or an ability that you would learn over time. And in a sense, it is. But the problem is, it's something that we have to be reminded of every day. We have to ask ourselves, what is in their best interest? That is the number one question you should ask before a sales call, during a sales call, and after the sales call, because that will focus you on what they're going to do. Because they're going to do what's in their own best interest, not their companies, not even their role, but them individually. And this is why in my book I talk about divide and conquer, meaning that you divide up. You do not want to have discussions with more than one person. Now, sometimes you're forced to, sometimes you have no choice. I understand that. But when you're able to divide, have a one-on-one conversation with people, you'll understand what's driving them. What do they care about? Now, I'm still giving the book away for free in PDF format for writing a review on iTunes or whatever your favorite podcast player is. Snapshot, screen save it, and email it to briangburns@me.com. And I will reply back with the PDF full version of the book. Now let's get into, first, why are we not good at this? One, because we're programmed to be focused on what we want. We've got quarters, end of month, we've got quotas. We're not thinking about what they care about. We're not thinking about what they want. And it's natural. It's unnatural for us to be considering their viewpoint. So how do we become good at it? You can role play, and that's really good. But when I was in retail sales, it was like always good. I was in high school and I sold shoes, and I used to go into other shoe stores, and I see how people approached me. You get the classic, "Can I help you?" And it's like, what a stupid question. But we have an automatic, "No, just looking." Instead of somebody saying, "Hey, those boots are good. Have you looked at these boots over here? Are you looking for something to run in? Are you looking for something just to walk around in?" An engaging question, something to understand. Hey, what brought you in today? Hey, you just killing time? Things to engage the other person. And then you can kind of understand how people are thinking. And another tool that I use is I watch a lot of ID TV, these murder shows and mysteries, and I try and understand who is the real person. All I have to do is ask me who has the most to gain, who's closest to the person, and all of a sudden it becomes clear. And you can tell when people are lying after a while. And if you watch, there was an HBO documentary on Robert Durst. I forget the title now, but it's great, where they actually catch him verbally lying, verbally explaining that he did it while he's in the men's room. It's so great. Oh, I wish I remembered the title. But we have to be able to understand how to get into our client's head, understand what's motivating them, why would they take action, why would they go with you. And the thing is, what are we taught? We're taught about our product, our insights, our understanding, and those are all good. They're components and they're elements of it, but at the end of the day, people are going to make decisions based off their own emotional viewpoint. Now, before I go into number 2, I want to make sure you're aware Pipedrive just came out with a new capability, 2 that I haven't really talked about. One is email tracking and link tracking. Why is this important? Because now you can tell when somebody is opening your email. Now, this is at no additional charge other than the premium package, the $25 a month. And you get, the greatest deal ever by going to pipedrive.com/brutaltruth. It's all in the show notes, the exact link, and you can get the trial and test it for yourself. But I've been using this, so now I can tell exactly if somebody doesn't open it, then you can easily send it again or reply to it and ask the question again or give the compliment again. Give before you get. And another book that will help you with this number one thing about empathy is the Go-Givers book by Bob Burg. Now, he really pounds on this, and it's a book that you probably should listen to twice a year. Get it on Audible, audible.com/brutaltruth, and you get it for free. So there's no excuses. But the point is that you start to understand what motivates people and how to engage with people, and that you have to give to get. And I'm telling you, a lot of you aren't getting this. And I'm telling you, a lot of people 30 years selling still don't get this. I had a manager. Every quarter, it was like, all he talked about was his number, his goals, and no one's caring about him going to club. And why should they? You should care about it, and you should not go in there saying, take advantage of me, it's the end of the quarter. And that was his tactic, that was his game. And it worked sometimes, but it was basically buying business, pulling business forward in exchange for a discount. And that's not the real use of a discount. The real use of a discount is to accelerate things that, to get new business, not just to, be lazy and pulling in business from next quarter. So empathy is number one. We've got to understand what emotions drive our customers, play to those emotions. And number 2 is listening. Now, this, flows right into what Gong is talking about, because the number one thing they found between A and B players was talk to listen ratio. And guess what? The A players were listening more than the B players, and substantially more, like 20, 30% more. And you should really check out their blog and their research on this. Why is this important? And then it's kind of a rookie thing, and if you ask somebody, what is selling, it would be pitching. That's what people think. And what it turns out to be, it's listening. It's given people the psychological air to express their concerns, because that is how we find out about empathy. We find out about empathy by listening to them. Now, this is critical, because if you don't understand what they care about, you can't talk to what they care about. You're talking about what you think they should care about, but you might be wrong. I've been wrong once or twice. You could be too. So number 1 is empathy. Number 2 is listening. Now, how do I become a good listener? Now, I've seen a couple of good tests. What you got to do is visually think of a baton, a pen in your hand. Now, when I'm talking, I'm holding the pen. As soon as a prospect or customer starts talking, you should give them the pen, figuratively, meaning that they now have the floor. They now are the ones speaking, and you don't say anything until they pause, meaning they've completed their question, their statement, their sentence. And then you have the pen back. You got to think of this as this baton back and forth. And instead of they say something that you pounce on or your voice activate it. And I talk about this with Chris in that episode, that I had this rep he was voice activated. As soon as I said a word that made him think of something, he would run me over and start pouncing on that point. And I didn't really get to finish. So he really didn't understand my whole point. He understood that key word that set him off. And all of a sudden, I feel slammed because he's now telling me something about something that he doesn't really understand, and we're wasting time talking about what he thinks I want to know instead of really what I do want to know. And this is a classic thing because in sales we feel like if we're not talking, we're not adding value. No, that's not. It's just the opposite. It's when we're listening to a customer really share what they're facing and finding out what they really care about. So how do we do that? But before I get into that, I want to make sure you're checking out nudge.ai's blog about how people buy, and they've got a new Salesforce integration. And this is what I use every morning. I don't use Salesforce, but I use their Google and Chrome plugin to find out everything I need to know about an account. I just type in the account. It finds out who I know there, what relationship I have with them, what's my closest path to get there from an introduction, their blog posts, what they care about, so I know what to talk with them about before I talk about what I care about. So make sure you're checking that blog out. So number 3 is questions. But before I get into that, check out YouTube and search for active listening. YouTube is a great way to learn what you want. Active listening is what you want, that skill. And there'll be plenty of videos on there, especially if you learn through video. Listening is the new talking in sales. If you become a good listener, you're going to be insanely powerful. Another exercise you can do, especially this time of year, because there's lots of parties and things to go to. Every party you go to, see how long you can go without telling them anything about you. Even if they ask a question, just flip it back to you. You say, yeah, that's important, but tell me about, this thing or that thing, or where you live, or what you care about, or how are the potatoes, anything about them. And believe me, I've gone hours without them ever asking a question, never mind me answering it. And I get feedback a week later. Somebody would say, oh, somebody asked about you and said that you were really a friendly guy and stuff. And it was like, because they were talking about themselves. Because if you go through a sales call and all you do is find out about them and you guide them to your product just through your questions, that is a miracle of selling. So number 2, from my perspective, is listening actively. Number 3 is questions. Now, questions are the mind control tool that we have as salespeople. I talked with a hypnotist about a year ago. I'm trying to remember his name. I wish my memory was good. I should have prepared better for this, huh? But he was the guy who was modeled in Magnolia by the famous movie star. And, he was really one of the best hypnotists there are out there. And he talks about questions. Questions are our only tool is mind control. Because when we ask a question, people are forced voluntarily to basically have to put that image into their mind. If I ask you what color is your car, that color is now in your head. You cannot get it out. And I didn't have to put it in your head. All I had to do was ask that question. If you ask what's important to a customer, or you ask, it seems like you're up against something. Have you given up on this project? Go back to the Chris Voss interview I did a couple of weeks ago. That is cranking on iTunes right now. People are loving it. I'm getting comments every day about how they applied that episode to get people re-engaged into a sales cycle with them. Make sure you're checking that out. So questions, we really have to study. Now, what happens most of the time is people, they read Spin Selling or listen to it, and they think that's enough. And it's a good start, but it's probably not enough. I'm listening to Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, again and again, because it's like these things are hard, because these things I typically avoid on the podcast because it requires people to change their personality. And I found that to be the hardest part of sales. What I found to be the easiest part is give people the directions in the process, the steps, because they weren't doing the steps. But if you at least show up and do the steps, no matter how you do them, you're going to do better in sales. But now we're talking about the actual difference between the A and the B player. And this is critical because, what have we been focused on? Your managers, are your managers really looking at those conversations? Are they? Are you looking at those conversations? Or are you looking at your KPIs, your number of phone calls, number of meetings, number of demos, number of emails? And that's activity, okay? But that doesn't dig into the quality of those activities. You'll see activity and then result. But what matters is what's happening in the middle, that mystery middle of how good was that conversation? How good was that interaction? How good was that meeting? And we all think that we're probably at least one stage better than we really are. And it's hard to take a step back and ask ourselves, how do I, because we lost the deal or the deal's smaller, it's delayed. It happens all the time. Happens to me. Happens to everybody I know. And this is not something you just achieve and then take your time off. This is something you have to practice and be conscious of every day. So number 3 is questions. So how do you become good at questions? You got to study them. You got to study like the who, what, when, where, and how questions. You got to study, how do they affect people? How do they make them feel? How do you build and stack the questions? I mean, this is a whole skill in and of itself, and it requires you to change the way you talk. And that's hard, right? So you got to start small. Don't go, taking a course in questions or even taking like the spin book. Start with situation questions, then start with problem questions. Then even if you get up to implications questions, the impact of changing or not changing with or without your product, those are golden. And then just come up with three good questions. How is that going to impact you? What happens if you don't do this? How is it going to impact your manager? How are they going to judge you on this? Those types of questions. Think about them. Think about how they would impact your business. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of bonuses here. Because everyone likes 3, 5 seems to be too many. But I'm going to give them to you. If you want to pause right now and come back to these next time, that's cool too. But think about, how do you differentiate yourself in that conversation? Meaning they want to and need to think of you as a commodity, that you are equal to your competitor. They want to then focus on price. That is their natural progression. What you need to do is get them understanding how you are different and how that matters to them. How do you do that? Okay? You got to pull it down to something that's going to impact them. Now, it's going to be different with every product, but you have to do that. If you don't do that, you'll have happy years. You'll think the call will go well, and what'll end up happening is they'll go with the cheapest product or the person they talk to last. I've seen it happen a million times, and I'm on calls all the time, and people just don't get how I'm different. I've got to really pull it out because they commoditize me all the time. Oh, you're a podcast. You're a sales trainer. You're a sales consultant. And it's like, well, yes, but do you understand how I'm different? Do you understand what happens if you don't do this? Do you understand this audience is different than my audience? Do you understand that having somebody who's actually sold, not just put up a bunch of YouTube videos and put the picture in front of a plane that they don't own, or say they've done a bunch of things that they haven't done, or give you stats that are based off of fiction, and because people believe what they want to believe. And all of a sudden, now you've got to deframe them and pull them back and have them rethink how they're making that decision. And that's how I have to do it all the time, every day, because everybody wants to commoditize me and label it. They think every podcast is equal to every other podcast. I go, no. You can start a podcast in an hour, and it's not going to be equal to a podcast that has an enormous audience and years of reputation and reviews and accolades and an audience that took forever to build and contribute to the audience. Now, bonus number 2 and number 5 of the top 3 is getting the next step locked down and on the calendar. If you don't do this, the deal it's kind of like a balloon with no string on it. It kind of floats away, and you have no control of it. You don't have that string like you do on a kite. Excuse me. So you have no control over it. That string is the next meeting. String is a reason why we're going to talk the next time. If you don't have this, you're basically at the whim of the client and the wind blowing the deal around with you not having control. These are the top 5. I'm telling you, if you can really, and I was going to do this interview with Chad. Chad had an emergency, so he couldn't meet up. But I'm going to do it again with him because I want to debate him, see what he comes up with. And this comes down to focus. And you might have 5 different things that might be equally as good, might equally apply to your sale. What I want you to do is kind of focus on these things, break them down to what are skills. How empathetic am I? How good of a listener am I? How good are my questions and how can I make them better? How do I differentiate myself from the competition? And how do I communicate that to my customer? Number 5 is how do I guide them to the next booked meeting, committed meeting? Not, let's check in next Friday. That's not a booked, committed meeting. If it's not on the calendar and there's no real date to it, it's not in the format that they see as a committed meeting, it doesn't exist. We'll talk in a week. That's not a committed meeting. It's next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. I will call you at this number. That's a committed meeting. And when you have that, that forces them to either show up or not show up. If they don't show up, you know where you stand. If they do show up, you now have a communication with them that you can now keep the deal moving. Now, you got to assume they're going to be talking to your competition in the meantime. So you have to set lockouts and traps, which I talk about in my book, you get for free, and you will find out exactly what will happen then. And once you do, then you'll be able to manage it and control it. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I wanted to get it out as soon as possible. I didn't want to have to wait, because me and Chad are rescheduling in a couple of weeks. We're going to talk about this. And we're also going to talk about, the other stuff, really what differentiates a person who is an A player. Now, I did this in the Maverick Matrix that you get for free in the Maverick Sellers group. Just join. It gets auto sent to you. Now, that was when I wrote the book, quite a while ago. And, I'm not even looking at it now. What I wanted to do was I talked to Chris and I wanted to take a step back because, his point is sales is so contextual. You should just take this as a reference point, which is good approach. What you don't want to do is say, this is the most important thing. Listening is the most important thing. But Listening showed up at the top differentiator. Okay, then question rate showed up next. And then talking about price. But what can't be told by a thing like Gong.io is how empathetic are you? Okay, I think that's going to be the next level of what they do. How good those questions were without being interrogating. That's the point he made, and it's a good one. Because if you focus too much on questions and you pound them with questions that aren't really high value questions, you feel like a prosecutor. They feel like they're up on the witness stand instead of in a conversation with you. So make sure you're checking out the B2B Revenue Show as well. I really appreciate everybody who's putting a review up, sharing the brutal truth on LinkedIn and Twitter or wherever you are. Connect up with me on LinkedIn. If you see some of my content on LinkedIn, I really appreciate it when you give it a thumbs up. Also, check out the show notes for all the great deals. I've got so many great deals in there. Check out Prezi.com. I've been using it now. It is so beautiful to be able to have this canvas to tell your story. And even if you don't present with it, just for your own reference point and getting your ideas out of your head of your typical sales conversation. Because these conversations, they're not identical, but they're pretty similar. There's a consistency among them to a certain extent, especially based on the level of qualification and stage they're at. And how you go through it. And sit down with like the best rep at your company that is really good and see how they do it. And don't try and copy it, but just study it. Try and pull out. And if these 5 aren't the right 5 for you, find out what the right 5 are for you. Find a book or a video or an expert in that area and study it slowly. I mean, and the problem what people do is they read the book over the weekend or they listen to it and they think they know it. This is a skill. This is an everyday thing. You know, I'm telling you, people like with 30 years that still don't get this, or they think they get it. This is every day. This is like practicing the piano. It's like, okay, how can I be more empathetic? How can I be a better listener? Okay, I really appreciate you listening. Make sure you're checking out the B2B Revenue Show. Let's connect up on LinkedIn, and I hope you're crushing it here. We're going into the latter half of Q4. Also, I'm going to do an episode on how to negotiate your territory and your comp plan. Look for that. I really appreciate you listening. Thanks.
I want to know the truth, because deep down in places that you don't talk about are team and management meetings. You want me on that call. You need me on that call. We use words like fleet view, volume control, total cost of ownership. We use these words as a backbone of a life spent negotiating something. You use them as a punchline. I have neither the time nor inclination to explain myself to people who rise and sleep under the very blanket of revenue that I provide and then question the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, may I suggest you pick up a phone and make some sales calls. Either way, I don't give a damn what you think you're entitled to.
Did you expense the lap dances?
I did the job I was hired.
Did you expense the lap dances?
You're goddamn right I did!